It was Mother's Day, and my son had just handed his mother-in-law a shimmering envelope with a perfect bow. Jennifer opened it with her impeccable nails, and her eyes lit up as if she had won the lottery. Tickets to Paris, a 5-star hotel, all inclusive, 15 full days. Tyler hugged her tight, tighter than he had hugged me in years, and told her with a voice thick with emotion, "You deserve the whole world, Jennifer. You have always been there for us." Have you ever felt like a ghost at your own family table while someone else wore the crown you paid for? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The applause for Jennifer's $150,000 world cruise hadn't even died down when Tyler turned to me. The room still smelled of expensive lilies and Jennifer's suffocating perfume, a scent that likely cost more per ounce than my monthly utility bill in Cicero. Tyler reached into a pile of designer shopping bags and pulled out a small, crumpled brown paper sack. It looked like a piece of refuse someone had accidentally left on his polished mahogany table. "Here you go, Mom," Tyler said. His voice was clinical, stripped of the thick emotion he'd just lavished on his mother-in-law. "Just a little something. We didn't want you to feel left out while Jennifer celebrates." I didn't reach for it immediately. I watched Sophia, my daughter-in-law, slide her phone into position. I could see my own reflection in her camera lens, a tired woman in a 10-year-old coat, framed against the backdrop of their multi-million-dollar Gold Coast penthouse. I was the before photo in her influencer life, the charity case used to make her brand of curated kindness look authentic. "Look how thoughtful Tyler is," she whispered to her live stream. Her smirk barely contained behind the screen. I opened the sack. My hands were perfectly still. My years as a draftsman had taught me that a steady hand is the difference between a structure that stands and one that collapses. Inside was a $10 gift card to a discount warehouse and a note. The handwriting was a rushed scrawl, the kind of script used by someone signing a receipt at a gas station. "Mom, it's important to be grateful for what we have. I love you." A cold, sharp clarity settled over me. This wasn't a gift, it was an audit. I looked at the $10 card, then back at the shimmering cruise tickets Jennifer was clutching like a crown. My mind began the accounting. I had provided the $250,000 in seed capital and education that built this empire. I had been the silent investor in Tyler's life, trading my health and my late husband Michael's legacy for his success. Now, the return on that investment was a $10 card and a lecture on gratitude. I didn't cry. I didn't demand an explanation. I simply tucked the card into my purse and smiled. It was the same professional mask I had worn for decades in engineering firms, polite, empty, and final. "Thank you, Tyler," I said. "This tells me everything I need to know." I left the party before they served the cake. I didn't need the sugar, and I certainly didn't need the fake toast to Jennifer's deserved luxury. I walked out of the penthouse and into the biting Chicago wind. The air was brutal, but it felt honest. I felt the sharp edge of the gift card through my pocket. It wasn't money anymore, it was Exhibit A. The contract was officially breached. The train ride back to Cicero was a rattling reminder of the reality I had never truly left, despite the decade I spent funding Tyler's escape from it. My apartment greeted me with the familiar scent of old brick and the persistent draft that whistled through the window frames. I sat in my single armchair, the $10 gift card resting on the coffee table like a mocking receipt for a life I'd spent and can never get back. I opened the old trunk in the corner of my bedroom. Inside were the blue and white remains of my late husband, Michael. His drafting tools, precision compasses, T-squares, and fine-tip pens lay nested in velvet, silent for 30 years. When Michael died on that job site, leaving me a widow at 35, these were the only things of value I had left. I didn't cry that night, just as I hadn't cried on the Gold Coast tonight. Grief is a luxury for those who don't have a small mouth to feed. I took on his work, translating my grief into technical illustrations. For 22 years, I worked triple shifts, my eyes blurring under the yellow lamp as I drew the foundations for buildings other people would live in. I sold every piece of jewellery I owned and took on extra drafting commissions just to keep Michael's heirloom set from the pawn shop while paying for Tyler's elite high school. I sold my wedding ring to cover the patent filing fees for his first genius idea. I ate canned soup and wore the same coat for a decade so I could pour $250,000 into his education and his first office space. Every brick in Tyler's empire was bought with my physical exhaustion. Some might ask why I sat there tonight and let them treat me like a beggar. They might call it weakness, or wonder why a woman who built a CEO didn't have the strength to stand up for herself. But they don't understand the invisible chain of the survivor. When you live in a house of mirrors built by a narcissist, you learn that your silence is your only sanctuary. You don't stay because you are weak. You stay because you have been trained to expect the blow. It is a psychological cage without songbird bars, where your survival depends on becoming invisible. But Tyler made a fatal mistake in his accounting. He assumed my silence was acceptance. He thought the chain was still holding me down, but he didn't notice it had rusted through years ago. I wasn't enduring his insults because I believed them. I was enduring them because I was observing. I was documenting the predator's habits before I set the trap. I looked at the gift card one last time before dropping it into a folder labeled evidence. The debt Tyler owed me wasn't just financial anymore. It was a debt of honor, and since he had no honor to pay with, I would settle the account with his empire instead. I picked up my phone and dialed Gary. The silence in my Cicero apartment didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt like a tactical observation deck. I watched the dust motes dance in the yellow light of the lamp I had used to draw the blueprints of my son's life. The $10 gift card sat on the table, a plastic monument to his contempt. Then, the phone vibrated. It was Tyler. He didn't lead with an apology for the Mother's Day insult. He didn't even ask if I had made it home safely through the biting wind. "Mom, I have an opportunity," he said. Everstake CEO, he imagined himself to be vibrating with a frantic artificial importance. The firm is expanding. We are launching the next phase of the architecture algorithm, but the venture capital market is behaving like a brick wall. I need a bridge loan of $500,000. I waited. I knew the ledger of this conversation had a missing entry. The bank needs collateral, he continued, his tone shifting into a practiced, manipulative softness. The lenders are demanding a personal guarantee to bridge the final gap in our credit line. Your Cicero property is the last piece of unencumbered collateral we need to push the total loan through. Since you are the sole owner, I just need you to co-sign. It is a formality, Mom. A family investment in our collective future. Think of it as your contribution to the Vance legacy. He was asking for the roof over my head. He was asking for the only asset I had left after 22 years of physical and financial exhaustion. He wanted to gamble my only shelter to protect Jennifer's world cruise and Sophia's influencer wardrobe. My compassion had been a luxury. They had overdrafted for years, and now he was looking for the final liquidation. I am not comfortable with that, Tyler, I said. My voice was a flat, clinical line. That apartment is my only security. The mask of the successful son slipped instantly. You are being incredibly selfish, Laura, he snapped, dropping the title of mother as if it were a cancelled subscription. After everything Sophia and I have done to include you? Jennifer was even talking about flying you out to Paris for a weekend just to show her appreciation. And you cannot do this one thing for the business. This is why you are always stuck in that drafty hole. You do not have the vision to see how wealth is built. While he was still berating me, I heard the sharp ping of a notification from my tablet. I didn't need to look to know what it was, but I opened the app anyway. Sophia had posted a photo of me from Sunday, framed to make me look particularly frail and out of place. The caption read, "It is so heartbreaking when family members let their bitterness block the path of progress. Some people would rather see you fail than see you fly. Sending love to everyone dealing with difficult, ungrateful relatives today." "Listen to me," Tyler said, his voice lowering to a predatory growl. "If you do not sign these papers by Friday, I am done. No more Sunday dinners, no more check-ins. You will be exactly what you have acted like all along, a stranger. Think about what that means for your old age when there is no one left to call." He hung up. I sat in the darkness, the Chicago skyline blinking in the distance like a mocking balance sheet. Tyler thought he was threatening me with exile. He didn't realise that being cut off by a predator is actually a rescue. I looked at the folder on my desk. Gary had just sent over the initial audit of the patent filings. The accounting was about to become lethal. The office was a vault of quiet professionalism, a world away from the screeching elevated trains and drafty hallways of Cicero. Gary sat behind a mahogany desk that likely cost more than my first 5 years of rent. He was a man of sharp angles and even sharper instincts, an old friend who knew that when I called after a decade of silence, the balance sheet of my life had finally tilted into the red. I didn't bring him Mother's Day flowers. I brought him a leather-bound folio containing Michael's original 1985 drafting logic and a thumb drive with the architectural patterns Tyler's company claimed as their own disruptive genius. "Trace the core," I said. My voice was as steady as a draftsman's ink line. "Tell me who actually owns the math that built that Gold Coast penthouse." For 4 hours, the only sound was the clinical hum of his computer and the rhythmic ticking of the high-end wall clock. I watched Gary's eyes flicker between the yellowed, hand-drawn blueprints and the digital schematics on his high-definition monitor. The logic flow was a carbon copy. Every geometric shortcut, every structural algorithm Michael had developed while working triple shifts was there, hidden under layers of modern coding. Tyler hadn't innovated anything. He had simply translated his father's sweat into a programming language and rebranded it for a tech-hungry market. Gary finally leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Laura, this is a total breach. The core logic of Tyler's entire software suite belongs to Michael's estate. And since Michael died without a will, you are the 50-50 co-owner of every single patent Tyler filed using this logic. Without your consent, he has no legal title to the core intellectual property." I looked at the screen, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a mother. I felt like a majority shareholder who had discovered an embezzler in the executive suite. Tyler's multi-billion-dollar firm was a house of cards built on stolen property. He exploited the unchecked enthusiasm of early angel investors and used a compromised private notary to bypass the standard verification process. He bet on the fact that as long as the revenue stayed high, no one would ever question the foundation of the patents. He had traded his father's name for venture capital, assuming the woman who worked triple shifts over a drawing board wouldn't know a patent. He thought My Compassion was a resource he could harvest indefinitely, but he had finally overdrawn the account. "He hasn't just ignored you, Laura," Gary said, his eyes narrowing with professional disgust. "He's been operating without a legal license to his own product. Every contract he's signed with those big developers in Chicago is technically fraudulent because he doesn't have clear title to the core property. He thought you were a ghost, but you're actually his landlord." I rubbed my eyes trying to summon regret, but there was only a frigid clarity. This wasn't a family drama anymore. It was an audit. He exploited the unchecked enthusiasm of early angel investors and used a compromised private notary to bypass the standard verification process. I had been the silent investor in Tyler's version of family, footing the bill for a subscription that only delivered insults and $10 gift cards in return. Now, I was revoking his access permanently. I never signed those rights away, Gary. I said, my tone as clinical as a foreclosure notice, and I never will. Gary pulled up a final document from the official filings, his brow furrowed with concern. "That's the thing, Laura. According to the paperwork Tyler submitted to his investors 10 years ago, you did sign them away." I felt the air in the room turn to ice. I haven't signed a single legal document for Tyler since he was an undergraduate. "Then we have a different kind of problem," Gary replied, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "We don't just have a patent dispute. We have a felony." Gary rotated his monitor toward me, the blue light reflecting in my eyes like a neon crime scene. On the screen was a scanned copy of a waiver dated 10 years ago. It was an official document surrendering all my rights to Michael's architectural logic and technical designs to Tyler Vance. At the bottom, there was a signature that looked remarkably like mine, but the curvature of the L was too fluid, the stroke of the V too hesitant. I had spent 40 years drafting technical illustrations with surgical precision. I knew my own line, and this line was a lie. The coldness in my chest didn't just deepen, it calcified. For a decade, I thought Tyler's distance was a symptom of his success. I thought he was just busy building a future. Now, I saw that he had been busy building a barricade. The $10 gift card and the note about gratitude weren't just insults. They were tactical distractions. He wanted me focused on the crumbs so I wouldn't notice he'd stolen the entire bakery. He didn't just forget his mother. He had actively defrauded a widow to secure venture capital. I looked at the blueprints of his digital empire and realised the truth behind the illusion of Tyler's tech genius. This is what most people never see: the rented power of a hollow shell. Tyler was a man living in a penthouse he didn't own, with a reputation he hadn't earned. His status was a high-interest lease, and I was the one who had been paying the monthly instalments with my life's blood. He walked through the Gold Coast with the confidence of a billionaire, but he was really just a squatter in his dead father's legacy. He had confused having money with being a man of character, but character isn't something you can buy with a world cruise for your mother-in-law. It is the foundation, and Tyler had built his house on quicksand and forgery. Gary's fingers tapped a rhythmic lethal code on his desk. This signature is the kill shot Laura. It is document fraud and felony theft of intellectual property. The moment I file this with the court, his firm's credit lines will be severed. His investors will treat him like a plague victim. He won't just lose the business, he could face a prison sentence. I didn't blink. I didn't ask for mercy. Mercy had been overdrafted years ago. He told me that if I didn't sign over my apartment, I would be a stranger. I said, my voice is precise as a compass needle. He wanted to take the last roof. I had to save his stolen kingdom. He doesn't have a kingdom, Gary replied. He has a crime scene. What is the next move? I reached into my purse and pulled out the $10 gift card, sliding it across the mahogany desk toward Gary. The note said to be grateful for what we have, I whispered. And right now, I am extremely grateful for Michael's meticulous math and Tyler's sloppy forgery. Prepare the injunction. I want it delivered during his next board meeting. The boardroom of Vance Architecture Systems was a temple of glass and ego, perched 40 stories above the city. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline looked like a scale model Tyler thought he owned. When I walked in, unannounced and accompanied by Gary, the room was thick with the scent of expensive leather and the self-importance of 6 board members. Tyler was at the head of the table, leaning back with the casual arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. Sophia sat beside him, tapping her perfectly manicured nails on a tablet, likely drafting another post about her blessed life. "Mom," Tyler said, his voice ringing with a false, patronising warmth. "You're just in time. The notary is on his way. We were just telling the board that the family is stepping up to secure the next phase of expansion." He gestured to a set of documents on the table, the loan papers that would have turned my apartment into his collateral. I didn't sit down. I didn't look at the chair he offered. I looked at the 3 major investors sitting across from him. They were the ones holding the $100 million checks that kept his stolen empire breathing. "I'm not here to sign your loan, Tyler," I said. My voice was a cold, precise instrument. "I'm here to audit the foundation." Gary stepped forward and placed a thick stack of blue-bound legal folders in front of each board member. "Gentlemen," Gary said, his voice cutting through the sudden silence like a scalpel, "you are currently being served with a federal injunction. Vance Architecture Systems is hereby ordered to cease and desist all operations involving the CoreLogic algorithm. We have filed a lawsuit for patent infringement, fraud, and felony forgery." The colour didn't just drain from Tyler's face. It vanished, leaving behind a grey, hollow mask. One of the investors opened his folder and pulled out the enlarged copy of the forged waiver. "What is this?" the man asked, his voice low and dangerous. "That is my signature," I said, looking Tyler directly in the eyes. "Except I never wrote it. My son decided that Michael Vance's work was his to steal, and that my consent was a formality he could forge. He traded his father's name for your venture capital. Chaos didn't erupt. It was worse than that. It was a cold, silent withdrawal. The investors stood up as one, their faces turning into granite. Their assistants were already on their phones, likely freezing every line of credit attached to Tyler's name. In the corner of the room, Jennifer, who had been waiting for a celebratory lunch, looked at her phone, her face crumpled. "Tyler, my world cruise agent just messaged me. They said a fraud alert was triggered on the corporate account and the final booking payment was automatically reversed." Tyler fell to his knees, his hands trembling as he reached for the hem of my coat. "Mom, please." Think of my reputation. We can fix this. I'll give you a seat on the board. I'll double the money. Just don't do this. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the $10 gift card, still in its crumpled brown bag. I dropped it on the mahogany table in front of him. I am being grateful for what I actually have, Tyler, I whispered. I have Michael's meticulously calculated legacy, and I have my own soul. You have a $10 card and a lecture on gratitude. I suggest you start practicing it. I turned and walked out. I didn't look back to see him begging the empty chairs. The elevator ride down felt like the first time I had breathed in 30 years. The collapse of Vance Architecture Systems was not a sudden explosion, but a methodical dismantling. Within months, the board ousted Tyler, stripping him of his title and his stock options to settle the mountain of fraud claims. He avoided a heavy prison sentence for the forgery, receiving a suspended term and 5 years of strict probation, but the social cost was total. The moment the lines of credit were severed, Sophia and Jennifer vanished from his life like ghosts fleeing a sunrise. The high-tech Gold Coast penthouse was sold at a public auction to pay back the investors he had defrauded. Tyler, the man who once thought he deserved the world, ended up in a cramped studio apartment on the far outskirts of the city, working a low-level data entry job for an engineering firm that doesn't even know his last name. I didn't keep the multi-million-dollar settlement money for my own luxury. I refused to spend a dime of that tainted fortune on a mansion or a fleet of cars. Instead, I stayed in Cicero. I used the funds to establish the Michael and Laura Vance STEM Centre, right in the heart of the neighbourhood where I spent 22 years drafting the blueprints that built this community. It is a place of light and drafting tables, equipped with the best technology money can buy. Every afternoon, I watch children from underprivileged families learn the same meticulous math Michael used to believe in. I teach them that a building is only as strong as its foundation, and a life built on the theft of another person's soul will always, eventually, crumble into dust. I've come to realise that we are often taught a mother's love should have no limits, that we should bleed ourselves dry until there is nothing left but a hollow shell. But I've learnt a harder truth. Your dignity must have a fortress. If you find yourself sitting at a table where you are treated like a ghost, or if you are being offered crumbs by the very people you gave the world to, remember this: silence is not acceptance. Silence can be the space where you gather your strength and document your worth. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free from the expectation that they will ever change. True justice isn't about watching them fail. It's about refusing to let their cruelty define your value. I am no longer just a widow or a silent investor. I am the architect of my own peace. And for the first time in 69 years, I am finally living in a structure I designed for myself. If you've ever had to build your own sun because the world tried to leave you in the dark, hit like and share your story. Subscribe to Stand with those who refuse to stay small. Your legacy is yours to protect.